Hello, everyone. Welcome to our learning collaborative. We're just going to give people a little bit more time to hop on, but it's good to see y'all. Welcome for those who have been with us before, and welcome to those who are just joining for the first time. Glad to have you. Today, we have a wonderful presentation titled Building Peer Programs, Culture, Belonging, and Boundaries. As we all know, that peer programming is a very important piece of HIV and aging services because peers have that really personal experience and understanding of what their clients are going through and what they experience. So how do we really build out those peer programs? What are some of the things that we best understand about peer programming? How can we help our peer staff create more healthier boundaries, and how can we support them as an organization to really succeed in their important community work? So I'm just going to go ahead and proceed as people are going to hop on as they do, but thank you for joining us. We like to start off with a land acknowledgement here at the University of California, San Francisco. So I would like to acknowledge that we're on the Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we encourage everyone to get engaged with the people that are native to your land and engage with them wherever you do your work, wherever you hold community, and may our collective efforts respect, restore, and promote the well-being of the native people here and everywhere. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Care and Wellbeing Center is a regional training and technical assistance program. Our geographic region is shown here, and our goal is to improve the quality of and access to care for all people living with HIV over 50 by helping service providers like yourself to better understand the needs and better understand the different strategies to care for the scoring population. So I just want to start off by saying, please fill out the evaluation after the session is complete. We provide our sessions for free, and your feedback is very important for us, and it helps make sure our trainings are helpful to you. And some Zoom housekeeping before we get started. We have dedicated question and answer breaks, but feel free to drop your questions into the chat. We have our wonderful speakers here to help field your questions as well. And then our amazing project coordinator, Constance Vasquez, is also here to help assist with some Zoom items. And here are our learning objectives for the day. And by the end of the session, you'll be able to take something back to your organization to create a culture of inclusion, belonging, and tangibly support people of lived experience. We have a wonderful panel of speakers for you today. And then before we get started, we're going to start off with an introduction poll. So just to get a gauge of the audience, on a scale of 1 to 5, rate how supportive your organization's culture, policies, and procedures are for peer service staff. So Constance, if you can go ahead and launch the poll. So 1 is the least supportive and 5 is extremely supportive. So we'll give a couple of seconds for people to go ahead and answer that. And it looks like we're getting a pretty broad range so far. And when you're answering this question, just remember, like, what are the different policies, procedures, and ways that you support peers in your programming, whether that's flexible time off, whether that's in your hiring, in your retention. So just like 1 more second. Okay, perfect. So it looks like it's a pretty even split. So 30% rating it a 3, 37% rating it a 4, and 33% rating it a 5. So since we have a pretty good spread here, we hope that our session today is going to help you elevate your services and organizations, like past the 5, because there's so many pieces to peer programming and organizational culture that there is so much to learn and so much to improve on. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with Lady Diana. She is from Casita, Feliz, and she is going to introduce herself as she proceeds with her section of the talk. So thank you.
Thank you, JB. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you're having a great morning. As JB mentioned, I'm Lady Diana Feliz Oliva. I am a first-generation Mexican-American daughter of an immigrant from Mexico. I'm also a transgender woman living with HIV for over 24 years. I'm a survivor of sexual assault and physical assault, formerly socially justice impacted population, formerly unhoused, have suffered or experienced neurodivergent issues. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a tia, I'm a prima, I'm a godmother. And I mention all of these intersectionalities and multiple overlapping identities because I can't be my authentic, true self if I don't walk in my truth with all my intersectionalities that I wear proudly. And that was one of the reasons that I got into social work and human rights activism and social justice work, was because I lived with so much adverse childhood experiences growing up in a small rural town, living in the projects, living in the barrio with a single mom who was suffering from alcoholism, and not knowing my father since they were divorced when I was 30 days old. So I came to my adulthood with a lot of trauma and a lot of adverse childhood experiences that has shaped and molded my career path, my professional endeavors, and then also my personal triumphs and joys that I live with as a brown trans woman living with HIV. And now that I'm aging with HIV, I'll be turning 52 next Saturday, May 11th. And so I'm looking forward to that because I never thought, as a brown trans woman living with HIV, never thought that I would live this long. So I have surpassed our trans life expectancy for trans women of color, and I'm proud to be here. Also, if you can go ahead and switch to that next slide, JB, I would appreciate it. But I come from a nonprofit world. I spent about 25 years in the nonprofit world. I started with the Fresno County Department of Social Services as a homeless food stamp worker and really worked with the homeless population for workforce development and to wean them off of dependent food stamps. And then I went over to the child support office and dealt with absent parents and their absenteeism of paying child support for their children that was supported by the county. And then, of course, I went into HIV and LGBT advocacy for the past 20 years and making sure that after my diagnosis, I wanted to make sure that no other little Dianas had to go through what I had to go through. And so I've been an advocate of changing the structural and systemic barriers that many of our BIPOC communities face, especially when you add HIV and queer identities. It continues to overburden us as a population. But thankfully, I got recruited in one of my last nonprofit roles by Gilead Sciences to become their HIV community liaison in Los Angeles. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And then I created my dream job within Gilead because I really wanted to address the barriers and the gaps that we were not addressing within our pharmaceutical company. And that was the transgender population, which I believe we all know that trans people, especially Black trans women and brown trans women, are disproportionately impacted by HIV. And so I really wanted to create a strategy and an initiative on behalf of our company. And so I created a dream job, pitched it to our senior vice president in public affairs. They loved the idea. And I left Los Angeles and moved over to Foster City to work in our headquarters office in Gilead Sciences. And I think I'm a great success story about you can go from community to corporate pipeline if that is your wish and your dream. Sometimes you can do amazing social work and HIV advocacy work within HIV pharmaceutical companies like Gilead. And I've been able to push Gilead to create corporate social citizenship or responsibility funding initiatives for the trans community. We ended up creating Transcend Community Impact Fund, which is the largest funder in the world for trans-led organizations. And I'm proud to have birthed that funding initiative within Gilead. I also created one of the HIV decriminalization funding initiatives within Gilead. Unfortunately, there's 32 states, well, no, now probably 29 states that still criminalizes people living with HIV. And I was one of those back in 2001 and 2002. And I was incarcerated for 3 months at the LA County Twin Towers Jail. And so I have a first direct hand experience with being incarcerated because of my HIV status. And so we created a fund called HIV is Not a Crime within Gilead. And it's a multi-million-dollar initiative. And we've been doing that for the past 4.5 years. And I was able to help create that and become the first program officer. Now in my role as the Director of Public Affairs in Latin America for Gilead Sciences, being the first trans person to be hired by Gilead in the US and now in Mexico in Latin America. I helped bring a $4.2 million initiative to HIV and LGBT organizations addressing HIV for all of Latin America. And so Mexico received about 35% of those $4.2 million. So everywhere I go within Gilead, I'm pushing Gilead to invest their dollars into our communities that desperately need the resources. So I'm very proud for that fact. And like, if I wasn't busy enough already, this had been a 25-year-long dream of mine to create a Latino, Latina, Latine, LGBT center here in Fresno to address our particular needs as people, as a culture, as a heritage. Because when I came out in 1998, there was no center or resources for people like me. The only places for us to commune or to congregate, to build relationships, to network was the bars, unfortunately. And sometimes the bars and nightclubs are not conducive, healthy building relationship environments for us as people. And so now that I just bought my second home, my retirement home in Fresno, I opened up my home to my nonprofit organization called Casita Feliz. Casita Feliz in English means happy little home. Feliz, of course, is my middle name. I chose when I was changing my legal name, Diana, because Diana Ross, she's the queen of Motown and she's a little diva. And I think I'm a little diva and I'm the Duchess of Fresno. So it has some connotation there too. And then Feliz is my middle name that I chose in honor and respect of my mom. Her name is Felicita, which means felicity or felicity in English, which means happy and joy. And now that I'm a woman and I was legally changing my name, I wanted a symbol of that joy and happiness. So I chose Feliz in honor of my new mental status. And then, of course, honoring my mom with her name. And then, of course, my dad's last name is Oliva. So I chose Diana Feliz Oliva. So I wanted to name my organization after my mom and then after the fact that I think LGBT people and brown people can intersectionally be happy and live with joy and liberation. And that's what Casita Feliz is about. Our mission is dedicating to enhancing our Latina LGBT community and other underserved communities, because there's a lot of small rural towns outside of Fresno that really needs the services here in Fresno as well. And so we do this through providing well-being support, holistic programming, education, supportive services, and making sure that we're always fostering health, equity, and addressing social justice in the Fresno and the Central Valley. Our vision is we envision a future where Casita Feliz, our diverse communities within our Latina and LGBTQ queer identities, we're continuing to thrive and we're empowered by our joy and liberation as brown people and as about queer people. And so we really wanted to create an organization that was by us, for us and by us. We call it the FUBU model method, if you haven't heard it, but it says for us and by us. But we developed the mission and the vision when we had our board of directors retreat last year. And I recruited a board of directors that I knew that were empathetic and compassionate to the cause, to my baby, my project, to my nonprofit. And I chose people that I necessarily didn't have the skill sets. And I wanted to bring board of directors that fill that gap and that barrier that I was experiencing as an executive director. And so we have a 14 member board. And during our board retreat, I was going to really go heavy with our strategic planning and goal setting and vision board and grant writing and just everything that the board needs for the nonprofit organizational development. But I said, let's take a pause. I know a lot of my board members, but I don't know in an intimate, personal, authentic way. And so what we did for the most of the day was really just get to know each other on a personal level, so we can really build trust and rapport and develop a culture within the organization that allows us to be our authentic selves without judgment and without criticism. And that means bringing some of our traumas, that means bringing some of our joy, and making sure that brings some of our thriving experiences to our organization. And so it was a wonderful experience just to sit with our board and get to know one another. We cried, we laughed, we set goals, we created a vision board, and we left our board retreat very inspired, very motivated, and also very educated, because many of my LGBTQ board members and some of our cisgender allies didn't know any history about the LGBT history and movement. They didn't know anything about the 1969 Stonewall riots. They didn't know anybody about Marsha P. Johnson or Sylvia Rivera, Harvey Milk. And so we did level set training at the beginning of our board retreat. We hired a dear friend of mine from Mexico City. She's a trans woman who has a wonderful, excellent presentation in Spanish to talk about LGBTQ history using a Latina lens and using a Mexican historical lens. So she talked about the US milestones within the LGBTQ community, but then she also went into what has happened in Mexico in the last 50 years for LGBT joy and liberation. So it was a wonderful training. It kind of level set everyone. It was all done in Spanish because I wanted it to be purposefully done in another language because we're all bilingual in our board of directors. And I thought it's important to making sure that we use our language that some of us were born with and making sure that it was culturally responsive to the needs of the board of directors. During that also, we created some wonderful practices moving forward. And I'll share with you in the next slide. If you can move that forward, JB. Thank you. And so here we wanted to align our values, our mission, our vision, and our team goals during our board retreat. And so we kind of exchanged some ideas as far as where they saw Casita Feliz in 12 months, in 24 months. And then we also kind of talked about and wrote out where we see Casita Feliz in 5 or 10 years. And so it was a really great exercise to do with your board of directors, or even, you can probably do this with your staff as well, especially your senior leadership team in your organization, but making sure that people feel invested in this new organization was important for me. So even though my board members, they're there to guide me and lead me and making sure we have balances and checks, or checks and balances rather. But it also allowed the board of directors to be really feel empowered and invested. And I think if we can come from that lens when we're starting an organization, or if you're already working at an existing organization, making sure that from time to time, you're having check-ins with your staff or your board of directors or your patients and your clients that you serve to seeing how can we better? How can we be better? Where are we missing the mark? Where can we improve where are some of the blind spots? Where are some of the gaps and barriers in services? And really pulling in that information, because I think when people are asked, they feel invested, they feel trusted, they feel a part of the organization and the team. And I wanted to create that from the very beginning of our development of our organization. And then of course, because of my almost 30 years of nonprofit and social services and public health experience, I have a lot of networking relationships from all over the world and all over the country. And we wanted to make sure that when we started our organization, we had some organizational mentors and coaches that can help us with our nonprofit organizational development. And so we got a lot of support from the Trans Latino Coalition with Bambi Salcedo in Los Angeles, several other organizations on Los Angeles like APAIT, Asian Pacific AIDS Intervention Team with Jury Candelario. We also got support from the Wall Las Memorias Project from Richard Zaldivar. And we continue to get some support from all of our allies across the country. So I think that's very crucial when you develop an organization or when you have an existing organization, making sure that you're having community partnerships, MOUs in place to making sure that you have some viability, some credibility, and that you enhance your reputation within the community. Because those organizations that you partner up with can vouch for you as well. And then the last little emoji that I wanted us to share here is a diamond. And we talked about this at our board retreat to making sure that we wanted to create a culture of autonomy, but also emotional well-being support. And so we were really honest and vulnerable at our board retreat. And I kind of shared towards the end, and I shared for the very first time in Fresno that I was HIV positive. No one in Fresno knew that I was HIV positive. I've lived in LA, I lived in Oakland, Foster City, I lived in Mexico, I lived in New York, I lived in Vegas, and every city that I've gone to live and to work after my diagnosis, I was proud to say that I was HIV. I was an ambassador for the HIV positive community. But in Fresno, my hometown where I was diagnosed, and when I ran away to LA to get help, because of the stigma and discrimination was so prevalent here in Fresno, and still is, unfortunately, I was too ashamed to disclose my status. And now that I'm an executive director and a founder of Casita Feliz, I really wanted to live my truth and live by example. How can I be a peer supporter if I cannot walk in my truth especially as a leader. And so I disclosed to my board members. My sister was on my board and my best friend was on my board. They were the only two people that knew. But I disclosed that I was positive that I've been living with HIV for the past 24 and a half years. And I was able to disclose something very vulnerable and personal. And I think that just really bonded us more as the board of directors, which allowed other board of directors to kind of talk about substance use, to talk about intimate partner violence, to talk about trauma that they were raised with as well, talk about the historical generational trauma that we live with because of our ancestors. And so it was a wonderful discussion. It was almost like a healing therapy session during this board retreat, but it really grounded us, it really united us and bonded us as the board of directors. And so I offered, as the founder and executive director and the leader of the nonprofit organization called Casita, Feliz, I offered my board members, hey, I can't always be the badass chingona Lady Diana who works at Gilead and travels to Mexico City and comes here and is trying to do amazing things. But there's times where I feel insecure, I feel lonely. I try to practice cultural humility. I self-evaluate. I check my ego to saying, okay, and that was one of the original questions I had building Casita Feliz. Am I doing this for me, my Dani, and my ego, so I can get the accolades, the recognition, the applause? Am I really doing this because there's really a need in Fresno in the Central Valley for Latina LGBTQ individuals? And thankfully that I have mentors and life coaches that kind of, reassured me that I was on the right track and making sure that I was providing a service that was desperately needed. But that's something that I always question, am I doing the right thing? Is this what Fresno really needs? And there's time as a leader that, and then I'm single, I don't have a partner to kind of bounce ideas with or get that mutual beneficial support. Sometimes being a leader and being single is a very lonely, isolated place. And so I offered my board of directors, hey, sometimes I can't be the badass Diana 100% of the time, and I'm gonna need support. I'm gonna need you to check in on me as well. And so I said, anytime that I'm feeling a little low or a little lost or I'm questioning myself or my insecurities are popping up or my imposter syndrome are creeping, I'm going to put this diamond emoji in our group chat. And so that allows you to check in on me. And then also, I want you to use that diamond emoji in our group chat when you are feeling down, whether it's personal or work related. I want us to foster an environment within the board and within the organization that we're always checking in ourselves emotionally and well-being. And so that's important for us to establish either as a volunteer organization or hopefully a paid staff eventually, and then of course with our board of directors. So hopefully these practices and these tools and resources that I shared this morning can help you and your organization. Thank you. And I hand it back over to JB.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lady Diana. It's always so amazing to hear about your story and the important work that you're doing for your community and so many communities that your life has touched and your colleagues have touched. And it is so, I'm always so grateful to share space with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then next up, I'm going to hand it over to Mazdak Mazarei from the San Francisco AIDS Foundation to better explain his role as a Senior Director of Equity and Health Justice. So take it away, Mazdak.
Thank you so much, JB. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yep. And I wanted to start by really thanking Lady Diana for just modeling for us the strength of vulnerability and the magic that can happen when we are able to bring our full authentic selves to our work and there's no separation there. So thank you for modeling that. My name is Mazdak Mazarei, as JV mentioned. I am the Senior Director of Equity and Health Justice at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And what that means is I focus on looking at internally at structural ways that we can make sure that the agency is doing right by our values of supporting the communities that we serve as people who also work within our organization and lead our organization through the whole lifespan from hiring through professional development and if folks want to getting into higher leadership positions, but doing that in a way that's hopefully thoughtful, embracing people's full selves and is supportive. That being said, I want to put the caveat out right now that, we are an organization with a history and a history that has not always been known to be good around this sort of work. So just wanted to share with you some of what we've been up to, but and offer that as maybe it'll be helpful for other folks, but we definitely don't want to set ourselves up as the ideal or the model in any sort of way. And so personally, I have more than 20 years experience providing uh, direct services and capacity building support to health clinics, community-based organizations, and health departments. That's where some of this learning came from. But I think more importantly, I actually started out as a peer in a peer youth, queer youth program. It was at the Lavender Youth Recreation Information Center, Lyric in San Francisco. So really see firsthand the power of these kinds of programs to support folks in this work. And just, I hesitate to call it a fun fact because I don't know how fun it is for most folks, but in another life, I also, and what helps inform my work is that I'm a certified end-of-life doula, um, and can talk more about that for folks if they're interested. That's a little bit about me. Next slide, please. So I should also say that speaking of Lady Diana, that some of this work, the seed money, the startup money came from Gilead for us to really be able to invest in doing equity work at another level at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. So I want to thank them for that support. And some of the background of this is a couple of years ago, San Francisco AIDS Foundation got its first, we have our first Black identified CEO who really made equity one of his main priorities when he came to the organization. And so what I'm sharing right now is a model that we use to kind of underpin some of the work that we do. And then I'll end by sharing some concrete examples of what we've been able to accomplish. So um, I would love to get if either a show of hands in the reactions or folks in the chat of who has seen this model before. It's the 3 dimensions of success, and it's adapted from the interactive associates. So I got one, Jesse Santos, Daniel, thank you. Great. Okay. So it sounds like some folks have seen it. I'm happy Traye has seen it because we work together. What this model does is it really offers a nuanced way to think about what success looks like within our organizations, within our programs. It talks about how often in this country, in this world, we focus when we think of success in terms of results. So the outcomes are deliverables. Often this is what we get grants. What does it say in our grant that we're going to accomplish? How much money do we raise? How many patients do we see? How many folks do we keep out of the emergency room? And so it's a focus on results. And this offers or invites us to look at other aspects of success as well, that results is not the only thing that makes a program successful. The other pieces are the process. So do folks feel good about their role within getting those results accomplished? Do they feel a part of this process? Do they feel like they've been able to bring their full selves to this work in a way that feels satisfying for them, that increases feelings of belonging? And then finally, relationships, the third piece. So maybe we did get all those results, we did great, but maybe we never want to work with each other again, and we've ruined those relationships. And if that's true, would that be success? And so this model really offers this 3-dimensional way to look at success beyond only results. And then the next slide that we're going to go to actually, I worked with a consultant named Dr. Renato Almanzar, who works out of the East Bay, and it's amazing, and put a social justice lens on top of these 3 dimensions of success in a way that I think really resonates with folks who do health justice work. So in this model, the results that our organizations are looking for is justice. So what does justice look like in terms of health and accessibility to health services? So it's a shared vision for what justice looks like, both externally and internally. And these are, our guiding principles, the mission, the vision of our organization. What are we actually trying to accomplish to create this? In terms of process, when we're looking through a social justice lens, it's about acknowledging and addressing power imbalances, right? So, and I would say particularly in decision making. So if how are people involved in decision making that impacts them? And I know Lady Diana mentioned FUBU, for us, by us. Where is it feasible for us to include the voices and the lived experiences of the communities that we're serving in the policies, the procedures, the way that we work with folks? And so thinking about that in terms of process. And then I get a little nervous talking about this in front of any HR people. Any HR people in here? Like HR adjacent. So the relationships piece is about love, and not like love that'll get you in trouble with your HR, but really creating meaningful opportunities for us to get to know each other as fellow coworkers. And so, and which actually helps proactively solve a lot of conflict. I know for me, someone can say something that offends me, but if I know them and I know where their heart is and I know where they're coming from, I'm much more likely to approach that conflict from a place of trying to love and understanding versus if I do not have those connections with the folks. So I share this model because when we look at our equity work at the organization, we really try to ground it in these three dimensions. And so folks have questions about this. It may be new to folks. Please share them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many of them afterwards as possible. But I want to now share some concrete things that we've done based on this model. So what does this look like within organizations? So the first is around person-centered policies, and how this relates to peer workers is, we often know a lot about what the communities we serve face. So for example, we have a lot of programs at San Francisco AIDS Foundation that use a harm reduction approach to folks who are using substances and maybe want to change their relationship with substances. So we believe in harm reduction fully. And yet in our employee policies, we used to have a zero tolerance policy when it came to drug use, even though we're hiring from folks from the community too, who may have experienced issues with substance use. And as anyone in our organization can tell you, relapse is a normal part of the recovery process for some folks, or recycling or starting to use again. And yet internally, we're saying, okay, if anybody does start using again, zero tolerance, you're out of here. And so we spent a lot of time really consulting with the experts, people with lived experience, and the folks that work with these populations from within the agency to talk about what would a more person-centered policy towards substance use look like, and have moved away from the zero tolerance policy, moving more towards looking at behaviors that may be antithetical to the workplace. And then also making sure, working with our HR, our people operations, to say like, okay, we know that folks are gonna relapse or struggle with this. So what programs, what services do we have in place internally so that when that happens, folks can get the support they need and potentially have a pathway back to working at the organization? And so it really shifted the way that we look at our policies and trying to not create this artificial separation between the people we serve and the people that we are. I also mentioned briefly talking about the involvement in decision making when feasible. And so at this point, there's no policy that goes through the organization that doesn't have at least some opportunity for feedback from everybody at the organization if they want it. Recognizing that we don't have all the ideas. People might have great ideas around how to make these policies more person-centered. And so it depending on the policy, some stuff we're like, it's legal. We can't, this is a policy as it has to be, but we do explain that so that there's transparency around why certain policies are the way they are, when policies can't really be changed, and when there is room for change, and giving people opportunities to provide input in that, so that folks feel more ownership around those policies and feel more of a sense of a belonging in the organization as well. And then, as I mentioned, opportunities for meaningful relationship building, especially during COVID. We found that folks did feel very, for the most part, felt very safe within their departments, but didn't really know other departments very well. And it started a little bit of a like an us and them dynamic. So we've been really investing in creating these times for folks to get to know each other, be with each other. Um, and it doesn't have to be these big extravagant things. It could be as much as doing icebreakers cross department when we meet that really are about getting to know each other, and have found that has really helped within the organization as well. And then beyond that, we also do look at a lot of data and evidence to see where there may be inequities within the organization in terms of like, who are we retaining, who are we hiring, who's getting promoted, who's getting disciplined, and really trying to assess, is there an equity component to any of that, and what can we do to make sure that who you are is not a factor in your success at the organization. And so those, I know I spoke through that quickly. Those are a few of the ways we're kind of implementing that model. And so I do really look forward to hearing questions from you all about this. And I do love this quote. We talked about power, love, and justice in the model. And this is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And so that is what we are trying to implement. And I think next, after some Q&A, wanted to talk about, sometimes we differentiate between peer programs and other programs and how we work and how we hire. And what we try to do at San Francisco AIDS Foundation is that the whole organization is a peer organization, right? There's no difference between the populations we're serving and the populations that work here. So try to talk a little bit about how we do that at an organizational level. And later on, Traye is going to talk about it within a specific peer program. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks. Thank you, Mazdak. So we have some time dedicated here for Q&A, so feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat about Lady Diana or Mazdak's presentation. But to start us off, we have some questions from the registration form that y'all filled out. So first up, for Lady Diana, how can we properly and comprehensively implement cultural awareness into our programs as best as possible?
Can everybody see me and hear me? Wonderful, yes. I really think it really needs to start at the top when you're creating your organizational development culture, and some of the policies, like Mazdak did a wonderful job, so thank you, Mazdak. But I think focusing on how do we properly develop a comprehensive cultural awareness program, really we need to understand why is it important to develop a cultural awareness component within the workplace? Because we're talking about acknowledging and respecting diverse values of people from different backgrounds and cultures. And we need to define cultural awareness in the workplace that is about being mindful and inclusive and intentional with our actions and our work ethic. And so why is it important? Because cultural awareness plays a key role in everyone's safety and security, comfort, in the workplace. I think when people feel safe and secure and heard and validated, the level of productivity and joy and liberation within the workplace just will have ripple effects. But we also want to make sure that we implement enhanced communication, whether that's through training or whether that's modeling as senior leaders or executive leaders, modeling enhanced communication skill sets with middle manager or entry-level positions. because that will eventually increase our productivity and our innovation and creativity within the organization, because we want people to feel safe to be their authentic selves. So the best ideas come out of your staff or your board of directors. Making sure that we adopt policies that are about inclusion, diversity, equity, and justice, because ultimately we want trust and respect, and dignity and grace within our organizations, and we need to address and develop policies that address that. And then making sure that, you know, San Francisco is a different culture from Fresno. And so I have to understand the cultural nuances of my Fresno local regional constituents or patients or client base, which is going to be different from San Francisco. And so we want to make sure that we educate ourselves and provide that capacity building or technical assistance to our staff or board of directors to making sure that we're addressing the unmet needs of our population. And then making sure that we understand conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is a central theme in nonprofit work. And if you don't understand the cultural nuances of conflict resolutions, that could be a detriment to your nonprofit organization. And so you want to understand that when you're looking people in the eyes, the verbal and nonverbal cues are super important when dealing with diverse cultural backgrounds. So those would be my tips on how to implement a cultural awareness program into the workplace.
And it looks like, Lady Diana, you have a question in the chat. How far away do you think a city like Fresno is from supporting their own org similar to a San Francisco AIDS Foundation or a LA LGBTQ Center? Is it just a capacity issue or a cultural issue?
I think it's multifaceted. So you have the capacity, and then you have the cultural, and then also there's, you know, I had the pleasure of working in LA, and I had the pleasure of working in the Bay Area with Gilead, and then my nonprofit work in LA. And even LA and San Francisco is a different dynamic when it comes to nonprofit. LA seems to have a more unified systems in place for organizations to share best practices, to coexist and partner and collaborate. And I noticed while I was in San Francisco in the Bay Area, even though I was working for Gilead Pharmaceutical, I was a board member of the San Francisco Pride, and that was a prime example, you know, that there was some reputational issues with San Francisco Pride. And then I got to understand the nonprofit landscape of San Francisco, and I didn't see a lot of collaboration or partnerships and stuff. And it was very, this is mine, this is my territory, this is my population, I own it, and I'm the gatekeeper, and no one else can do it. And I found that a little bit disheartening. In Fresno, there is no services. We're probably 20 years behind the times when it comes to progressive forward thinking, when it comes to health equity, because people just really don't even understand the difference between equity and equality. And so there's a lot of level set that needs to happen, capacity building, a different change in mindset. And then I think more than anything, the stigma and the discrimination that not only plagues people living with HIV, and then when you're aging, the comorbidities that we develop, but just also LGBT and sexual identities is so far behind the times here in Fresno and the Central Valley, because it's a very religious, conservative community, the Valley. And so we don't talk about sex. We don't talk about intrapart violence. We don't talk about incest in our communities. We don't talk about mental illness. And so we say, pray it away, or go see a curandero or cundadera, to you know, see a healer, to heal it away. And so it's a different nuances here in Fresno than it is the Bay Area or Southern California.
Thank you. And really the large themes I'm getting from this conversation is like really understanding like your constituent base and like what are their values, like what is their mindset around equity, around these different areas, no matter where you are, whether that's San Francisco, whether that's LA or Fresno or other areas throughout the different regions. How can we best move forward that conversation of equity, of inclusion, of supportive programming to really meet the needs of those that are underserved? So thank you. Last question for this Q&A session will come from the registration form. So for Mazdak, what are ideas for addressing resistance to change within a long-established agency?
Yeah, thanks, JB. I think this is a really important question, especially because I feel sometimes in organizations and with staff at organizations who have maybe been there for decades, there can be a little bit of this is how we've always done it, mentality, right? Where I do feel so the strategies we have made is to really try to focus on what are the barriers that staff feel or what are the pain points, because I think staff are really good at sharing like this is what's not working, and including staff in the idea if this is the process point and like so what can help fix this, and it's almost like using motivational interviewing techniques, and also kind of linking some of this equity work to those pain points when maybe there are um, when maybe not everybody is looking at that. So, we're in the middle, as you all know, of this huge culture war around the importance of equity initiatives. And so what we try to do is like to not get involved in that culture war and to really focus on outcomes for staff and for our clients, and really show how by focusing on some of the stuff that feels like equity, it's really about improving those outcomes in a way that the debate kind of goes away because folks can focus on how do we show up for our clients, how do we increase retention for our staff that belong to these populations. Um, and then, I mean, I think it's just regular change management stuff for any, like dealing with any kind of resistance. It's finding champions within leadership. So, we're lucky, as I mentioned, our CEO, Dr. Tyler Termier, this is a big passion of his. And so he's a champion. um, Start out with small wins. So there are some departments, again, within our organization that are more willing to take this on than other ones. And so we will start with them. And then when other folks see the success that that group is having, they're more likely um, to want to join in the initiative as well. Um, and then the last thing, I hate to say this, but it's really, I was part of this equity learning collaborative recently, and we're talking about all these models for systems change, and it just takes a really long time. So to recognize and not get disheartened that we're talking about a years long game here, and to really recognize and celebrate those small wins that get you closer to getting where you want to be. Hopefully I answered the question.
Perfect. Thank you, Mazdak. And I really just want to repeat that last part. This social change, these institutional organizational changes, they do take time. And I'm sure with a lot of people in the audience that are familiar with the HIV movement, now that we're focusing on HIV and aging with the Care and Wellbeing Center, these larger scale movements, these larger scale initiatives do take some time because we're talking about so many different pieces that affect people's quality of life, affect people's access to services, and like affect the even funding levels for specific regions, specific areas. And it does take time for us to understand those needs, to advocate for them, and to deliver those services. So just keeping the mindset of like the outcomes, and then also for what Lady Diana mentioned earlier around keeping the morale up and like keeping your team engaged and like making sure that everyone is on board for the work to come. And that's a big component for a lot of our equity work, for our audience here, for a lot of our speakers. So I just want to appreciate that. And before we go into Traye's section on managing the transition from peer to provider. So Traye, why don't you go ahead and get us started off?
All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, awesome. Hey everybody. My name is Traye Turner, manager of clinical assistants with our Black Health Department here at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. I'm really happy to be here and happy to share, like JB mentioned, sort of those considerations of when you're moving someone from a participant or a peer more into like a staff role. So before I get into that, just a couple of things about me. I am a Black gay artist, foodie, anime lover, gamer, and STEM coach. So I work for part-time with another organization called Calculus Roundtable, where we work with schools around the Bay Area, primarily in underprivileged neighborhoods or communities, and try to help uh, kids have access to all sorts of STEM stuff. So I have more of a focus on coding for video games for kids, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, those are just some things about me. I was born and raised here in California. I have a bachelor's of fine art in game development. That's actually why I moved here to San Francisco almost 14 years ago, was to go to art school. So I went to the Academy of Art University. And yeah, how did I get to this work? So when I moved here to San Francisco, I was just so excited to be a part of the LGBT community that was here. So I would go to all sorts of events. I volunteer for like Frameline Film Festival. I got involved in different like chat groups. Um, Volunteer for different organizations. So um, yeah, at the time, I remember just being in different groups or different things and kind of talking about my very uniquely sort of like Black experience, and not always having folks that could really understand it all the time, or didn't really know how to support me in that. And so I was really searching for kind of like a Black gay space where I can kind of unpack some of that stuff or kind of have that shared community. And so, very long story short, I ended up finding Black Brothers Esteem at the San Francisco here at San Francisco AIDS Foundation. Is actually during a program event where people tabled at Strut, and they talked about their different programs. And so one of the orgs I was volunteering for had a table there as well, and I saw some of the brothers from Black Brothers Esteem there, and I was so stoked. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, like this is what I was looking for. And so in 2016, I started coming to the groups, and I just really loved the conversations. I liked the deep dives, kind of unpacking the Black experience, the gay male experience, unpacking um, all sorts of different things. And so I was actually working as a graphic designer at a cupcake bakery when the program assistant role for BBE came up. And I remember the program coordinator there was like, hey, we have this role here. Would you like to work this? And I was like, no, I'm happily employed right now, but thank you so much. And then they laid me off like right after Christmas. And so then I came crawling back and I'm like, is that position still there? And he said yes. And so I applied, and I've been working at the foundation ever since. So I started off as a program assistant for Black Brothers Esteem, having previously obviously attended the program, moved into a program coordinator role, and to or health educator into program coordinator, into my current role as manager of clinical assistance. So now we work with folks from community and those who are interested in working in public health, who have little to no experience and just really want to get involved in these organizations, whether that's on the psychosocial side, programs, or more clinical side. And so just helping folks get more experience, more hands-on, and certifications to help in that career path. So that's me. And yeah, we'll go to the next slide. I think. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So from participant to provider, things to really consider before transitioning to program staff. Hiring people from the communities, as we know, the communities we serve can be a great way to make sure that community has a voice at the table, and that services can be informed by people with expertise from their lived experience. As both hiring managers and those being hired to make those transitions from client to provider, there's many things that should be considered before making that decision. So I love this picture. As I mentioned, I'm a huge anime fan. But I have this picture of Serena, if you've watched the English version of Sailor Moon, or Usagi, which is the original name of Sailor Moon. So, when Usagi's going to school, she just has the responsibilities of just, making sure her homework's done, reports and everything. But once she Sailor Moon, there's all these different responsibilities and expectations. And, if Usagi comes up to a villain, they're gonna be like, okay, well, who are you? But then if Sailor Moon shows up, and they're like, oh my gosh, like we need to, it's not good for us. So I think this is a great example, kind of like when you're making that transition. So these are some of those main things to consider, as I mentioned. So, and we're going to go into detail a little bit. So one is kind of that shift in balance of power that happens when you're moving from a peer into more of a staff position. Change in how you're able to participate and engage with community members. So this is in person and online. Um, Considering what does it look like representing or kind of speaking as an individual versus as a representative of an organization. And then also change in relationship to services. So this is a really big one that we're going to talk about as well. And it's really just, if you are receiving services from these programs, like how is that going to look different and how might that impact you once you're hired on or if you become staff? So here's that first slide. So be mindful and shift and balance the power, perceived and actual. So, one thing one example I like to give people is, if you're a participant of a program, say like for BBE, for example, if you are in a discussion group and you're one of the peers, um, everyone is still held to the community guidelines. But let's say me as a peer participant, I can't really hold the space in the same way that a facilitator can, or to really say, hey, I think you've stepped over this line and maybe, maybe give warnings or say like, maybe today's not the day for you. Like there's not going to be a peer-to-peer that's dismissing someone from the group. And so we have to really be mindful of that when we're changing and how that might change the implication of those changes with our peers when we're shifting. So, like I said, decision making, follow through with duties, upholding space and programs, expectations around support, facilitation, conflict management, um, and then access to an arbitration of resources. So, finding what those resources are and making sure that they get to community members. There's a greater responsibility to making sure that we do get the word out and make sure that people know of those services that are there. And then that authority kind of in and out of programs or even perceived authority. And so the picture we use here is with great power comes great responsibility from Spider-Man. Um, Other things to consider is how we're able to participate and engage with community members. And so obviously a big one is HIPAA protocols, not sharing private health information, things like that. And yes, even with friends, sometimes there could be a little bit of that transitional period, I think, where people adapt to the reality of that. It's going to be different if I'm a participant talking about maybe someone in group who is in the hospital or has some things going on. But once I become staff, I can't just buddy share that around or things like that. So there's obviously professional protocols that folks should definitely um, obviously should be trained on and be made aware of. Um, how you're able to share space with community members. So whether that's organizational spaces, whether it's groups, whether it's events, whether it's in bars, clubs, online, whether it's on Facebook, social media platforms, things like that. And then a shift in socializing. So existing in potential social circles, how that might change the dynamic, sharing substances, parties, dating apps, spaces that might be sexual, like all these are things that folks should be thinking about, especially if they're making that shift. And so here's an activity that you can consider to really illustrate this point a little bit differently. So imagine this picture here is just depicting two friends, you know, great friends, nothing out of the ordinary, good time. But then how does this change, or the context of this change, if this is a provider and a client? Um, and why might that be, you know? So something to think about. Um, so yeah. Uh, so representing as an individual versus an org representative. So as we said, there's just going to be that sort of added weight to statements. So that's the extra responsibility, that making sure that the information that we're putting out is accurate, health information, things like that. Less just sort of speaking off the cuff, for lack of a better way of putting that. And yeah, and I think that one of those things that I don't think really it feels real until you're really in those roles as staff is how community really does hold the information that you are putting out, and really respecting that what you're saying is accurate. And so that really adds that extra responsibility to make sure that we are up to date and putting out that stuff. So part of that is also just being associated with an organization and its values, or an organization's history, and what the implications of that might be as you're navigating and moving through spaces or trying to partner. Folks may look at that and be like, oh, well, you work for this organization, and hasn't this organization has had this particular history or have done these particular things. And so that's something that also is part of it. Um, and then there's also the expectation of learning of and holding history. So that could be with a group, with a program, with an organization. Um, Lady Diana mentioned a little earlier, like how are we holding the history of the LGBT community and people within um, our greater community, and the contributions they made, and sort of how different people have been impacted. Um, so also thinking about how your actions can reflect on org and its affiliated services. So yeah, I think that one speaks for itself. And then added pressures of holding services for marginalized communities. And I'm going to speak to that one a little bit more as well. So yes, strategies for maintaining healthy boundaries when you're making that transition. It is so important to be mindful of any biases or pre-established relationships, and how that might change how you move or interact. Or one thing that is really good, or one thing that I would do with my team in the past, is I would check in. I'm just like, does it seem like I'm being unfair to this person? Does it seem like, did what I say feel fair? Did it feel, you know, uh, yeah. And so just having your team to bounce off of, and if you need to, redirect clients to other team members, especially if there does seem to be some sort of conflict of interest, checking in with your supervisors, checking in with your HR or PNC teams, or people and culture teams. Um, and if you're doing events, this is one thing that I do as well, is just make sure what hat you're wearing, or make it clear what hat you're wearing. So because I mean, another thing to think about too is as a Black gay man, and for folks who are looking for services for Black gay people, it's not like there's a million options in San Francisco. And so at some point, there probably going to be some sort of intersecting, or some sort of overlap, or some sort of, you know, and so I'm inevitably going to see friends or people I know, or things like that. And so, if someone's like, hey, there's this event, are you going to be working it? Are you going to be there? Just being like, yeah, I'm going to be there, but, I'm going to be tabling. I'm going to be there. I can say hi, but, that's the degree at which I'm going to be in this space. And maybe starting to have those conversations with folks, or figuring out what that looks like for you. Another one is addressing inappropriate behavior immediately and very clearly. You don't want it to escalate. You don't want there to be any sort of um, ambiguity around that, or any sort of potential muddiness. And so I think it's just better for everybody, just making it clear, like, hey, that's maybe not appropriate, or now I'm in this role and we really can't explore whatever that looks like. But then also whatever the guidelines are with your organization, just making sure you're aware of what that is and checking in um, with supervisors or staff or whoever you need to as well, just to make sure that you're um, either documenting or just like following through with proper protocol. Avoid interactions that can implicate or out clients to others. So it can be very easy or comfortable, especially if you've been in community, you see your friends, you see all these people. It's like, oh, hey, oh my gosh, hey girl, like I see you over there. But if you are now in a staff role, with our organization, if we see someone out and it could be different from org to org, but our general rule of thumb is if you see someone out, usually you wait until they come say hi to you or they acknowledge you, or, you're not going to be like, hey, oh, I know this person from program, or I know they go to this or whatever. Sometimes people can feel some kind of way about that because they're like, well, you saw me out and you didn't say hi or you didn't whatever. But, be able to have that conversation and be like, I can't really do that. Or, if I see you, maybe I'll, just come say hi to me first. And if you say hi, I mean, obviously I'll say hi back and we could have a conversation. But, just wanting to respect everyone's anonymity, or respect sort of their privacy in their relation to the programs and services that they're receiving, which can be challenging. So things to consider. Ultimately, one should consider the shift in dynamic of existing relationships and potential future relationships, any changes in access to services, the degree in which these services can impact you, and is the job compensation and benefits enough to offset these changes? So this is really major. If I'm coming to programs and it's helping me with food security, housing, resources, maybe mental health services, but now I come on as staff and I'm working maybe part-time or per diem, but I'm still held to all these same boundaries. But now I've um, cut myself off from something that was sustaining me. That's something that should really be um, uh, made clear ahead of time. So for us, when we're doing our hiring processes for our clinical assistance role, we actually have a question in our pre-interview phone screen where we ask people, do you receive services from San Francisco or its partners? And even if they say yes or no, we're just like, okay, just so you know that if you are, when you make this transition, that can impact your ability to receive services or receive particular benefits or stipends or gift cards or things like that. And so, just so people are really made aware of that before. So make sure that it's clear that they are considering these things before onboarding, set clear expectations of what that's going to look like and how, if it is going to impact someone, so that they're really making an informed decision. Oh, and so yeah, so this is basically the example I gave. So yeah, at as staff at SFAF, we're generally unable to receive mental health counseling services, benefits, food cards, or stipends from SFAF programs, groups, and are encouraged to receive services from other orgs to avoid any conflicts of interest. So like I said, if you were receiving those gift cards, food support, monetary stipends, or even if you're on SSCI and being hired on a staff, that could significantly upset your livelihood if uh, considering depending on the situation. So another thing about this transition that I think is really an important part, and we kind of talked about this a little bit too, is thinking about how we avoid burnout. Um, so one great thing about hiring from community is that there is an invested interest. I mean, we're living, existing, moving through these communities are impacted by the same things that the folks who we're serving are also impacted by. And so there might be what I've witnessed, especially, and even have myself, where it's just like, we want to do this work well, we want to make an impact, we want to do all the things, partner with all the people, do X, Y, Z, but there also has to be support or safeguards so that we don't burn out. Um, especially because turnover is such a prevalent occurrence for those working or existing living within marginalized communities. So, so as people with lived experience, especially queer, trans, people of color folks, can feel these pressures. You know, oftentimes program and services for the most underserved and marginalized communities are understaffed, underpaid, or undersourced. It's imperative to have sufficient staffing and team prep to alleviate pressures for staff using PTO. So one thing I relate this one to is when once we got to the pandemic, I remember just all the stressors of, I'm sure as everyone remembers, of COVID-19, the impact that that had. And so for us, it was like, how do we support um, our clients, our participants, you know, like um, who may have already been experiencing food insecurity or housing insecurity, or maybe they don't know how to access a Zoom meeting, or maybe don't have the tech to do that, or just don't have the tech proficiency to exist in more of an online sort of telehealth space. And so it's like navigating all these things on top of the programs that we still wanted to have so people had a supportive space, but then operating as a team of two. And so that was incredibly stressful. And I remember even though our team culture was around sort of like having that time off or taking that time, you know, it's like I understood like, yes, taking time off is important, getting those health wellness days, taking a moment if I need it. But because of the workload, because of the fact that we weren't staffed sufficiently, it's sort of like if I take this day off, that's half the team gone. And then all that work's gonna fall on my coworker and like how is that gonna impact him? And so it's sort of like it was very challenging. Luckily, you know, because of everything that was happening in the pandemic and um, because of our own organizational values of really recognizing communities that are disproportionately impacted and sort of our priority communities that we want to serve, you know, we're really able to advocate for having more team, developing and putting in proposals for a Black Health Department. So now, if someone would have told me 7 years ago that there would even be a Black Health Department, I would probably be like, you know, that's a very nice idea. I think that would be great. That'd be awesome. I don't see it, but now, you know, times change, and I think it's really um, recognizing and really honoring the staff and what they're saying they need, and really supporting them in that way. And so, yeah. Um, so embrace that work culture of self-care, support, and examining qualitative outcomes. So I really put that in there as, you know, sometimes you just won't have the staff and you won't have the resources, but it's like e examining not just hard program deliverables, but looking at other ways that we're evaluating the quality of the services that people are receiving or the outcomes that are coming out of the services that we're giving. So we're not burning people out saying, you know, you're a team of 3, but you need to hit like 400 people a week or something, you know, like if it's not sustainable, if it's not realistic, then like how is that impacting these teams that really do want to do the work and really make a difference? Consider health and wellness days and hours in addition to mental health and emotional supportive services. Um, Allow people to have a walk if they need to grab a coffee or a cup of tea. You know, are we stacking meetings back to back? Are we giving space for folks to decompress or to have space to unpack um, the work or kind of safely be able to get the support they need to continue to do the work that they're doing? So here's some strategies. I won't go through it too extensively, but this was from www. Louis. Oh no, okay, I'm not gonna. It's right there. I don't want to butcher that. It's right here. Please check it out. But some things I really want to highlight in this strategy to avoid burnout, like we mentioned, self-care, take those breaks, identify sources of stress, and you know, be able to try to mitigate those, practice mindfulness, um, exercise, set boundaries. So that's my pro tip here is practice your no. Um, and it doesn't have to be a hard, like mean no, but it could just be like, hey, you know, I can't do that right now. I'd love to help or I'd love to work on this project with you. And it could be hard because we do want to do all the things and uh, make a huge impact. But I mean, being able to set those professional boundaries and just say, you know, I don't have the capacity to do this right now, or maybe next time, or maybe find another way that's more manageable to work with someone. And just, but I think also allowing people to be able to say no without repercussion. Like, you know, it's sort of, if someone's really doing a lot, and, you know, and just not overworking people. Um, Alrighty. So as hiring organizations, what are some things we consider? We should make sure that people are properly and equitably compensated for their work. Um, so ensure staff are properly supported and empowered in their roles. Provide necessary self-care resources, benefits, and equitable PTO. Provide ample opportunities for job development and advancement. If we're hiring from communities and we really want to, like, um, honor the work that people are putting in and really see people move and develop into more um, advanced positions to be able to make a greater impact, we do have to be investing in these in our staff, in our communities, and making sure that there are opportunities for job development, training, advancement, um, things like that. Avoid exploitation and tokenization, pigeonholing and underpay practices. If people are doing the work, if we're hiring them, if we shouldn't be making it a quota or saying, you know, we need our TGNC one person and they're going to handle everything and be the catch-all. Like, that's not fair. That's not cool. And how is that really supporting someone, setting them up for success if there's not a greater team or a greater infrastructure, and not just hiring the one person to be the fix-all for everything? And then also paying them. If they, you know, if they are that person, then, you know, um, I always say that minimum wage isn't livable wage. Minimum wage is the legal amount that someone can pay you that, you know, the government allows it to be paid, but is not always necessarily a livable wage. And so really think about how we're um, making sure that people are supported and also able to take care of their uh, basic needs and live if they're going to be working for us. And that's it. So thank you everyone for your time. I guess we're moving on to the Q&A section.
Thank you, Traye. And it was amazing. It was an amazing talk on how can we really support people as they're making that transition from community member to a staff member at as a peer support specialist, as leadership, as all these different roles that peers can step into to better serve their communities. So thank you for that. And I see a lot of connections between what Lady Diana shared and what Mazdak shared of like what are the different opportunities that we can, as an organization, tie in those factors of equity, right? So how can we make sure that people have the support that they need, are able to support themselves, support their families, support their communities, to engage into the work, but then also have solid boundaries to better understand the different pieces of their own community service. So as we go into this Q&A session, please think of any other questions for Traye or our other speakers here as well. But we do have a number of questions coming from the registration form. So Traye, first up, how do you go about boundaries without losing trust from clients? You mentioned this a little bit, but do you mind expanding a little bit more?
I think practicing transparency and honesty. I think people really appreciate um, you just being real with them. And it's sort of like, I think it's worse when you overcommit or promise things that you can't deliver on. And then that, I think, erodes trust more than just saying, you know, I don't think I can do that. That's maybe outside of my role or outside of my purview or outside of what we can do, but like offer alternatives. I think when it's coming to like holding boundaries, just like really being clear, because I think it's worse when someone doesn't know what those boundaries are or what those guidelines are, and then they run up against the wall, and then there's some sort of um, some sort of action or some sort of warning that has to happen versus just knowing ahead of time, like this is where the boundary is. And sometimes, sometimes there's pushback, but I think for the most part, people respect it, especially if you're showing up authentically and doing the work. I think in most cases, community members want to support the staff as well that are supporting communities. So I think it's just building that trust and that positive sort of feedback loop.
Perfect. And then I see there's one question in the chat. Is this work unique in HIV/AIDS service organizations, or is it more widespread than I know? Would any of the speakers like to take that question? I have some insights from the aging service space, but I would love to hear anyone else's input.
I think it's very widespread, not only here in California, but across the country when you're dealing with different patient populations, whether it's medical setting or mental health settings, recovery settings, reentry service settings. We all tend to hire participants and transition them into a peer-led role. So I think it's very common. I think HIV and AIDS has a special niche, right? Because of medical confidentiality and HIPAA, and because of the disability and the chronic illness that we deal with, that's protected by the Disabilities Act. But I think it's pretty well widespread throughout many social determinants agencies that we all deal with intersectionality-wise.
Thank you. And then Mazdak, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with Lady Diana about that. Around any population that's smaller that we're having peers serve, those populations will face similar challenges. The one piece I think that I wanted to really highlight based on what Traye said is that, being in the San Francisco Bay Area, we are lucky in that there are other services that people can use. So we can make those boundaries, but wanted to acknowledge the reality that there are lots of parts of the country where there's maybe just one organization. And so it means something different for a staff person to then say, I'm not going to interact with my friends in a certain way or the clients of this organization because maybe that's the only place where folks come. And so we have worked with other organizations where some of the policies that we have may not be feasible for their communities. And then it's really about thinking about where is a potential harm and what are other ways that we can set up boundaries that don't cause someone to have to stop being a part of their community in order to serve their community. So I did just want to make that point because it's not like everybody can do what we've done.
Absolutely. Going back to the point of understanding your local service environment and how can you create these boundaries, create these policies to really make sure that you're still delivering the services to the community without hindering the livelihood and well-being of your staff and your clients. And then we have another question in the chat from Carissa. Has anyone had experience writing a peer support model into service delivery for Ryan White funded service standards? Our planning council is looking at doing this for psychosocial support services. Does anyone on the panel have insight on that? So Carissa, I think for that one, we'll go ahead and provide some assistance offline. Constance, just tap me later to make sure that we circle back to that piece. But in terms of writing peer support, there's a lot of literature and other pieces to support the execution of that kind of programming. Let me go back and see what kind of resources that we have to help wrap that into a grant application, especially for social support services, because that's a high need area around HIV and aging. And then does someone have a comment?
Well, I just was going to say, sometimes Google is my best friend. So I just put in the Google search engine bar, how to write a peer support program delivery, yada, yada, yada. And it gives me so many resources, and then I'm all night looking at all the articles and research studies or best practices and examples, because there's tons. And then I can copy and pick and choose and create my own service delivery plan for a CDC grant or Ryan White federal grant that is tailored and customized to your particular region and the patient population that you serve. So I would start with Google as a great foundation and framework, and then you can copy and paste what you need and tweak it for your outcomes.
Exactly. So thank you for that, Diana. I think that's a great point regarding any grant application, because I noticed in the registration form there were a lot of questions regarding funding for peer support services. So it's like, how can peer support services especially serve your community? And then describe the need of the community, and how can it provide a really unique, innovative way to address that need, given the organization's standpoint, your staffing, and your funding level, and the community's needs. So perfect. Thank you. And then Mazdak, thank you for dropping that Target HIV resource in the chat. Target HIV also has a lot of resources on peer programs and a lot of different pieces. So if you search the different topics, it's able to really show a lot of kinds of learning opportunities, frameworks, and different best practices. So thank you. And while people ponder other questions for our speakers, we have some more questions from the registration form. So I think going back to Mazdak, so what are some tools to explain the importance of peers and hiring individuals with lived experience to the leaders in an organization? So kind of following this conversation.
Yeah, I sometimes hate that we need to do this, but I think the best case that we can make to a lot of our leaders is about how having peer programs actually help supports the outcomes and the mission of the organization. And so I can give an example. In San Francisco, the Ending the Epidemics committees went and did a lot of interviews and focus groups with folks from the populations that were most vulnerable to acquiring HIV, and really asked them, like, if you were to design a program, what would it look like? And one of the things that came across most consistently was the power of being served by folks who had been in their shoes before. And not only around having more culturally relevant care, which was a big part of it, but also the power of seeing someone who has been through what you've been through get to the place where you want to get through to, so that this idea of like, oh, I know it can get done. And so I think there's a lot of research, or you can create your own focus groups that shows that, so that you can link like this thing that we're trying to do, maybe getting to 0 HIV infections. The best way to do that is through peers. So yeah, that's what I think the strongest argument is.
Perfect. Thank you. And kind of developing off of that conversation of engaging people and better understanding the local community's needs. So Traye, for this question, what does recruitment look like for these peer positions as far as being equal opportunity?
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy we got this question, because as I was sitting here, I'm like, I forgot to mention XYZ. So this actually perfect. Okay, yes. So for us with the clinical assistant program, we do try to find folks that do have some sort of lived experience or in the communities. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in programs necessarily, but like are yeah, just out in community. And so one thing we thought of is like, how do we make sure that our hiring practices are equitable and like in alignment with the values that we're um putting out, or that we say, or when we're uh you know um training folks. We decided that, when we were first hiring, we realized that resumes and cover letters were like a required field on our hiring website. And we're like, okay, well, how is this equitable if we're pulling folks from the community that who might have that lived experience, but may not have had the opportunity to like put together a great resume or have access to be able to store a digital copy of something, or may even have the know-how. And so making it where it wasn't a required field, and then making sure that we're still following up with people if they're applying. So it does it take a lot more time and effort? Yes. But is it more equitable and give people the opportunity to have a, a job develop or be a part of a job development program, or have that pathway to serve or work in public health that probably wouldn't have otherwise, or have been overlooked just because of um, that? you know, I think it's worth the time and effort. And I think when we're talking about, being equitable, I think it does take more time and energy, but I think the payoff and the greater benefit is worth it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then switching gears a little bit, back to Lady Diana. So, the question is, what are workarounds to employer policies that restrict the hiring of the previously incarcerated?
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here with my laptop. I think some of the workaround regarding folks who have experience with the social justice impacted background, I think we all can agree that hiring either formerly incarcerated or social justice impacted populations is invaluable to our work in the field of HIV and for other many fields that address social determinants of health. And I think it's more of an investment and not as a cost or a burden to our organization, because the invaluable lessons that they learned through being in the system, and they might have participated in trainings and education, I think those lessons are really valuable to the organization and to the vision and the mission of any organization, because it really kind of says that we invest in our people, and we are trying to develop the professional leadership development and the skill sets of each of those individuals. So I think what we could do is really train our HR department about some of the incarceral effects in the workforce. And so for me, example, I have a criminal record, and when I try to get a job in nonprofits, thankfully, nonprofits are a little bit more lenient and flexible to hiring people with a criminal background. And so I think developing HR policies to address these particular populations and individuals that have gone through an experience, either incarcerated, whether it's county or whether it's state prison, making sure that we are flexible in our recruitment process. So really reaching out to some of like the Fresno County Department of Parole, the state parole, the county probation systems, and making sure if they even have any qualified candidates with great character traits of overcoming so many barriers, that might be a great candidate or fit. So if we're not making those inroads with job recruitment agencies or these incarcerated entities, I think we're kind of missing the boat, because we can tap into a great pool, especially if our mission is to support the reentry population. And so I think developing new HR policies and procedures in place that works around this. And so, for example, if you don't have a policy in place when it comes to HR and workplace, where you can provide flexible time off or remote options at times, because sometimes our socially justice impacted populations may need to see their probation officer or parole officer. And as a nonprofit, we have to be amenable to that, and we have to be flexible to that employees in our team, just like we would be accommodating to anybody that's living with a disability or somebody's going through mental health challenges. We want to make sure that we operate with policies and procedures that is amenable to the flexibility of the populations that we serve and in the populations that we are hiring.
Thank you so much for that. So really just want to summarize kind of the three strategies around not just, I know we highlighted those that are previously incarcerated, but like also for a lot of people with other types of lived experience. So building that internal culture and buy-in from leadership, from HR to understand the value of people's lived experiences. And second, to have those external collaborations and connections with community that know that these opportunities exist. And then third, something else that I was really hearing and connects to Traye's point around like personal professional development is like creating those like making sure that you create those opportunities and development paths for the people that want to engage in serving their communities. So perfect. Thank you so much, Lady Diana. And I just want to open up this space for additional questions because we have one last question from the registration form. So this can also go to any of the panelists. So how do you support peers in maintaining appropriate boundaries with clients, whether that be for dating, whether that be for community building? I know it's a broad question, so just your personal take as we close out this session.
JP, if I may, can I just readdress the question that I had just answered? Because I forgot to mention, you know, I've been doing some studies regarding socially impacted populations or formerly incarcerated. And one of the models that I liked that we are planning to implement in Casita Feliz is the true second chance model. And if you don't know about it, I Googled, you know, the term about a month ago, and I really love the model. If you haven't heard it before, it's called True Second Chance. And it really creates kind of like an initial assessment of fit, right? So it goes into discovering if they were participated in any in-prison training programs, second chance staffing agencies, work release employment, referral pipelines from transitional employment programs, other nonprofit workforce connections, organizations, faith-based groups. We know that Christian Victory Fellowship is really popular serving the formerly incarcerated population. So tapping into faith groups, and then also government partners, like I mentioned, either the probation department or parole department. Those are great tools, and it would give you an initial assessment fit for these individuals that are trying to work in the nonprofit spaces.
Thank you, Lady Diana. So for everyone, again, that's True Second Chance model, and we'll include that in the post-session follow-up as well. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So regarding our last question, so what are some ways that you want to share with this audience of how do you support peers in maintaining appropriate boundaries with clients? If any of our speakers want to start with that, or if any of our audience members as well have some best practices from your own work, like we open up that discussion as well. So whoever wants to take it off first.
I could start us out. I would say a good way to support your team is just helping hold that space or have those conversations, hold those boundaries. Sometimes it could be difficult, I would say, or challenging to have the conversation with community members, or sometimes it isn't really metabolized until they hear it from someone else or that boundary is really held. I think part of that is also making sure that your team are on the same page around those expectations or what um, those clear boundaries are. One tool that we use to I know I kind of touch on it a little bit, but sort of like in an online space, you know, we have the practice of having like essentially our personal, like if you're on Facebook, having your personal Facebook and like more of your professional kind of work Facebook page that is more, you know, specifically for engaging with community or engaging with our populations. And I think it really helps to hold some of those boundaries as well. So yeah, if anyone's watching this, you can Traye Black Health Turner on Facebook. That's it.
think something I'd like to add too is I think sometimes we put these boundaries or rules out without really kind of explaining why. And so I think when we do that, it might be more likely that people are like, oh, that's not really important and skirt around it. And so I think we try to implement something called compassionate accountability, and really starting person first about like what are the real needs that might be met by breaking these rules with our boundaries with clients, and acknowledging that, and maybe talking to folks about what are other ways to get those real needs met, and then to talk also about the real impacts of what can happen when things go south with the client, in terms of them not being able to access these services that are so important to them anymore. And not to say that these things won't happen anymore, but I think it leaves more room then for folks to approach you if something's going on, or if they need extra support, or even if something happens, so that there can be a way to address it without going straight to like worst case scenario.
And I just want to add, I just want to echo Traye and Mazdak's sentiments. I think it's really important to level set your organization about why is it important to have and develop healthy boundaries, right? Ultimately, it's to protect our physical, emotional well-being. And you do that through conversations and communications at the very onset when you're onboarding individuals, especially peer individuals. So you can define their role, their responsibilities, their rights, and their limits in order to protect them and have them create healthy boundaries, as well as creating healthy boundaries and policies and procedures within your organization to safeguard everyone. Because if you don't have these healthy boundaries set up at early on, you're going to get into those muddy waters. And unfortunately, those come with consequences. And so I love the fact that Traye mentioned that, and Mazdak mentioned that you also have to, talk up to your staff about the benefits of healthy boundaries and some of the negative consequences or results or impacts or outcomes that could benefit or detriment your patient population and your organizational culture. Because at the end of the day, you want your organization to be known as a psychologically safe environment where there's work-life healthy boundaries developed. And it's practiced through the senior leadership team, middle management, and entry-level positions. And there's a clear policy and procedures or guidebook or toolkit that has been developed by the organization to making sure that we're always continuously ongoing, providing conversations, communications, capacity building, and trainings, because it's just not a one-stop shop and check the box for your HR and for your upper management, but you have to have, like when I eventually have a staff, let's say maybe 5 or 10, maybe hopefully later this year or next year, I'm going to check in with my staff every week, if not every month, to say, how's everything going? How are our healthy boundaries? Because I think that's really important to constantly have an ongoing discussion about healthy boundaries, because you avoid burnout, you avoid low production, you avoid de-investment in the organization. All of those are factors of not checking in with your staff and revisiting healthy boundaries and healthy relationships within the organization.
Yeah, I think maybe to add real quick to that too, is sort of the boundaries that we hold, even with like our hours of operation or in the office, because I think of how many times clients have felt disappointed because they're like, oh, I tried to reach you or something happened, but then we're more understanding, or they didn't have to experience that hurt, when it's like, okay, well, I'm in the hour this time to this time. Even though I have a work cell phone, like I'm not going to be checking it on the weekend or at times where I'm not in my office hours. And so I think having that healthy boundary in that way is able to maybe allow people to not feel hurt or not experience some sort of disappointment or false expectation, and kind of know like when they can seek support or when to reach us, and to really all those times too.
Perfect.
And also with our staff and our teams. Don't, if you know someone's on vacation and you know they're the kind of person that will likely check an email even though they're off, because I do the same thing. Sometimes I like to make sure I'm not just coming back into work at absolute zero. So maybe I'll check maybe the evening before slightly or see what was happening. But generally speaking, if I know it's a team member, they'll probably check their team's messages, their email, even though I may put in there, don't disregard this until you get back. But realistically, they're probably going to read it and check it and do something or stress out about it. Then maybe I just won't send that email. Maybe I'll wait till they're back in the office. And I think that's also another way to honor and respect people's boundaries, especially if we know our team are the type to check in and maybe are still working on holding that boundary as well. So I think that's a healthy way of supporting our team.
Perfect. Thank you. So, really getting the sense of like that peers and community members want to do this work. So, what structures can we help develop and co-develop with them and revisit as they engage in this work to better support so like serving their own communities. And like everyone has said, it's a ongoing process. So with this session, we created an implementation tool. So it'll be released with the session slides and recording. With this tool, we'll be able to help you understand the process of creating your mission, vision, and understanding the culture that you want to have within your organization, as well as some additional resources around creating trauma-informed workplaces, strategies to avoid burnout, and really how to build a collaborative team to help create this organizational culture to best serve people of lived experience in your services and in your leadership. So I want to just applaud everyone for their time as your speakers. And I see a little dog joined us. So thank you for your time. And please take a second to complete our evaluation. Like I said at the beginning of this training, our sessions are completely free. So your input would greatly help us better understand the needs, better understand how we did, better understand how our speakers did. So please just take a little bit to complete the evaluation, and we would greatly appreciate your inputs on this session so we can continue to make future sessions like this one and to better serve your needs. So with that, if there's any last comments, I just want to say again a big thank you to our speakers, Lady Diana, Mazdak, and Traye, for their help in creating this really special training on building peer programs around culture, support, boundaries, and belonging. So thank you, everyone. And we will be posting these slides and the recording as well on our Care and Wellbeing Center website. So last plug for that evaluation, I dropped the link in the chat. So please take a little bit of your time to complete the evaluation. And go ahead, Lady Diana.
Now, I just wanted to say thank you again, JB, for this opportunity, and for the rest of the presenters, Mazdak and Traye. Wonderful hearing about your work and all the wonderful development and skill sets that you bring to San Francisco AIDS Foundation. I wish we had more organizations like that in the Central Valley. But I also just want to let everybody know that many of us, including myself, we're deeply flawed. And perfection is never the goal. Progress is always the goal. Providing excellent work and service should always be the goal, not perfect service or perfect delivery programs. I just want you to keep that in mind and give yourself grace and compassion to fail, make mistakes, learn from them, and move forward. I think sometimes in nonprofits world, we're just so hard on ourselves. I'm my own worst critic, to be honest. And so I have to learn now that I'm in my 50s and I'm much more comfortable in my skin. I allow myself more compassion and more grace and say, I don't have to be perfect as long as I'm progressing to excellence and excellent standard of care, excellent service delivery. Wonderful. But I want to make sure that I'm my goal is not perfection, it's excellence. And then making sure that I allow myself that grace and the compassion. And I think most of all, for any nonprofit leader or employee or peer support individual that's going to work at an organization, you want to foster an environment of joy and liberation and fun. I think when you come to work and your body tenses up, you're already stressed, that's not a great, productive, fun environment to work in. You want your bosses, your coworkers, and the patients and the clients that you serve, to making sure that we're fostering an environment that is joy, is loving, is compassionate, is holistic, and all the isms will be addressed if we bring the right attitude, the love and the grace that I think we all deserve. And I think everything else falls into place after that.
Perfect. Thank you for that. There is truly no better ending notes for sharing compassion, sharing grace in this deeply important work as we better serve our communities, better serve those that are aging with HIV, and better serve those that are disproportionately affected by the many things that happen in the society. But as we mentioned earlier in the session, these things take time, these things take community, and I am very thankful to share this session with y'all. And last plug for the evaluation, so we can better understand like how the session went and what we can do better in the future. But with that, I will let you all enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. So thank you for joining us. And just one last round of applause for our speakers. It was truly phenomenal. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.